Blessed day, everyone. I am Trisha Clary Ganwalo from Bachelor of Science and Development Communication, and I'll be your presenter for today's video. Our topic is all about Malthusian theory, and this is very familiar for those students na may subject ng agricultural environmental class or in an economics class, or pwede din siyang sa araling panlipunan in our high school days. So the objective for this presentation is to understand the meaning of Malthusian theory and to understand its application to socio-economics. So the topics that will be involved in this presentation is all about who is the man behind the Malthusian theory, its definition, importance, and criticisms. So now let's talk about our first subtopic, Thomas Robert Malthus. Sino nga ba ang lalaking ito? So Thomas Robert Malthus is a British philosopher, an English cleric and influential economist in the fields of political economy and demography. He's born on February 13, 1766, and he died on December 29, 1834 in England. So he's very popular for his book, An Essay on the Principle of Population, which is used for economics class and other stuff that involves Malthusian theory. So, he is noted for his Malthusian growth model. So, dun pa lang from his last name and to his notion of his Malthusian growth model, alam na natin na siya ang man behind the Malthusian theory. So, Thomas Robert Malthus is also known for his population growth philosophies, and he's also the founder of the Statistical Society of London. So now, let's talk about Malthusian theory. What is the Malthusian theory? So the theory states that food production will not be able to keep up with growth in the human population, resulting in disease, famine, war, and calamity. Malthus states that when food is not sufficient for everyone, the extra people will have to die. So, yung Malthus theory nag-e-explain na kapag walang equilibrium between the food resource or food supply and the population, magkakaroon tayo ng crisis. So, just like this graph, the blue line is the resource, which is constant lang yung changes niyan. Constant lang yung taas ng number. While population is meron tayong mga circumstances at mga factors na hindi natin mapipigilan yung pagtaas ng population. Kaya nagkakaroon nito ng hindi constant na dami or hindi constant na mark ng number nito. So kapag nag-meet yun, yung number of population at yung number ng resource, walang equilibrium. Kumbaga, tumaas yung dami ng population at hindi na kaya matugunan ng food resource. That intersected point would be the point of crisis. Dun yung part kung saan tayo magkakaroon ng problema at magkaka-experience ng adversities. So now, let's talk about the importance of Malthusian theory. Bakit nga ba importante yung Malthusian theory at bakit nga ba importante na pag-aralan natin ito? So Malthusian theory explains the relationship between the growth in food supply and in population. It states that population increases faster than food supply and if unchecked, leads to vice and misery. So, alam naman natin na kung ano yung Malthusian theory. So, ang importansya nito is para malaman natin at ma-remind natin yung mga sarili natin at ang mga tao o mga leader na nag-hold nito, nag-hold ng isang community or nag-hold ng isang country na kapag walang equal number between the food supply and the number of population, magkakaroon tayo ng crisis. Na kapag hindi natin na-check yung statistics ng dami ng population at food resource, magkakaroon talaga tayo ng problema. Magkakaroon tayo ng adversities, maglilid ito ng suffering at misery. So now let's talk about criticisms and applicability. So yung first criticism is the mathematical form of the theory is wrong. The mathematical formulation of Malthus' doctrine that food supply increases in arithmetical progression and population increase in geometrical progression in 25 years has not been proved empirically. Rather, the food supply has increased more than arithmetical progression while population growth has not been in geometrical progression so as to double the population in 25 years. But this criticism is beside the point because Malthus used his mathematical formulation to make his principle clear in the first edition of his essay and deleted it in its second edition. So, yung mathematical formulation ni Malthus dun sa statistics na in-apply niya for the number of population and food resource is merong loophole, merong mali. Kasi hindi naman natin alam kung meron bang changes when it comes to future years, di ba? So, doon na kasi nakita, marami kasing na-prove din yung ibang lugar, lalo na sa England, na hindi naman talaga dumami masyado yung population, but rather mas dumami yung number of foods resource na kaya pa rin tugunan yung pangangailangan ng mga tao. So number 2, failed to foresee the opening up of new areas. Malthus had a narrow vision and was particularly influenced by the local conditions in England. He failed to foresee the opening up of new areas of Australia, the United States, and Argentina, where extensive farming of virgin lands led to increased production of food. As a result, countries like England on the other continent of Europe have been provided with abundant supplies of cheap food. So, hindi nakita ni Malthus yung opening of advancement. Na pwede din na yung ibang lugar like United States, like Australia, pwede sila maka-provide ng food resource sa England. Or kung hindi lang naman natin makikita lang England to other countries, but also in country to another country, hindi niya nakita yon na mayroong possibility of trade, na may possibility of importing and exporting products, di ba? So, hindi niya nakita yon, kaya parang maraming loophole yung theory niya. Kasi, wala nang country na matatakot sa starvation kasi meron namang ibang countries na pwede mong hingan ng tulong. You can trade and you can even buy products from other countries. So applied a static economic law to a period of time. The Malthusian notion that the food supply increases in arithmetical progression is based on a static economic law at any one time, or the law of diminishing returns. So Malthus could not foresee the unprecedented increase in scientific knowledge and agricultural invention over a period of time, which has stayed the law of diminishing returns. Consequently, the food supply has increased much faster than arithmetical progression, and Malthus has been proved wrong not only in the advanced countries but also in developing countries like India with the Green Revolution. So, hindi nakita ni Malthus yung pag-apply ng mga economic law na napag-aralan niya naman talaga yon at hindi niya na-apply sa theory niya na pwede na magkaroon ng advancement. Kagaya, hindi lang sa developed countries like US, Argentina, Australia, or any developed countries, but also in developing countries like India. So parang nagkaroon ng extensive farming at advancement when it comes to producing food supply. Next naman is neglected the manpower aspect in population. One of the principal weakness of Malthus' thought has been that he neglected the manpower aspect in population growth. He was a pessimist and dreaded every increase in population. He forgot, according to canon, that a baby comes to the world not only with a mouth and a stomach, but also with a pair of hands. So, yung criticism na ito is nagpo-prove kay Malthus na there will be more production for manpower. Kasi 'di ba, more yung number ng population. So more than yung manpower. So para nakalimutan niyo din yung sinabi ni Canon nga na yung bata is hindi nabubuhay sa mundo na merong bibig lang. But rather, meron siyang kamay at paa na pwedeng magamit to work, 'di ba? So hindi man siguro lahat kasi parang baka ibaton niyo sa akin na yung mga PWD, paano 'yun, 'di ba? So yun nga, hindi lang naman nabuhay yung mga bata dito sa mundo na may bibig lang, di ba? We have all the knowledge, the skills, the extremities that we have for working, di ba? For fending ourselves, di ba? So, nakalimutan niya na kapag tumaas yung population, dadami din yung number ng manpower. So, kapag dadami yung manpower, mas mapapabilis yung production, mas mapapabilis yung trabaho, di ba? So now let's talk about population not being related to food supply but to total wealth. So the Malthusian theory rests on a weak relationship between population and food supply. In fact, the right relationship is between population and total wealth of the country. This is the basis of the optimal theory of population, that the argument is that if a country is rich materially and even if it does not produce enough food for its population, it can feed the people well by importing foodstuffs in exchange for its product or money. Yun nga yung sabi ko kanina, nakalimutan ni Malthus na i-include yung trade, nakalimutan niya yung advancement of importing and exporting products, and yun nga, yung trade ko kung saan pwede naman na bumili sila ng food production or food supply rather para ma-feed yung mga sarili nila. Kaya kalimutan niya yun, na parang ang tingin niya sa mga tao na parang robot lang na ito, gawin niyo to, gawin niyo yan, mag-produce kayo ng food, kainin niyo yung food. Nakalimutan niya yun. That yung relationship ng population at food supply is sobrang dikit lang naman nun eh. Parang ang narrow ng approach na parang sobrang pangit ng relationship between the population and food production, where in fact, kapag marami yung population, marami yung manpower, maraming magtatrabaho, maraming mapuproduce, it means total wealth for a specific country, di ba? So yun yung nakalimutan ni Malthus, that the population is not related to food supply but to total wealth. So number 6, increase in population, the result of declining death rate. So Malthusian theory is one-sided. It takes the increase in population as the result of rising birth rate, whereas population has grown considerably the world over due to a decline in death rate. So Malthus could not foresee the marvelous advancement in the field of medical sciences, which have controlled fatal diseases and made human life longer. This has been particularly so in underdeveloped countries like India, where the Malthusian theory is said to operate. So may mga countries naman din talaga na na-apply pa rin yung Malthusian theory, lalo-lalo na kapag hindi naman talaga na-lead ng maayos yung isang country. Hindi maayos yung pagkakadala ng mga leaders. So the Malthusian theory then is proved wrong from other countries or other particular community na parang nakikita naman na yung dami ng population, syempre marami yung population, mas maliit yung I think yung birth rate at yung death rate ata nito is pag namatay yung isa, may dadagdag na 3, di ba? So parang sa stop nun yung yung death rate, mas napupunan at mas maraming ang nagagawa yung maraming population. Like for example is yung China, di ba? Marami silang manpower, marami silang population, at mas industrialized pa nga sila mas develop pa nga sila kumbaga sa Philippines at sa ibang lugar na medyo nakokontrol pa yung population. And nakalimutan niya din yung medical advancement. Ang dami kasing advancement when it comes to in this generation na nag-e-evolve due time, di ba? So may advancement when it comes to trading, may advancement when it comes to medical and other stuff. Nakalimutan niyang i-foresee yun na when it comes to having so much people, the drive of learning more, the drive of inventing, the drive of having to be able to help a community is nandun. Magkukos yun ng other learnings na mag-feed sa mga tao na kumbaga pampahaba, let's just say na papahabain yung buhay. Like, yun nga, masastop yung death rate, but rather more on giving more manpower instead of, death nga. So, next one is empirical evidence proves this theory wrong. Empirically, it has been proved by demographers that population growth is a function of the level of per capita income. When per capita income increases rapidly, it lowers the fertility rate and the rate of population growth declines. So, Dumont's social capillarity thesis has proved that with the increase in per capita incomes, the desire to have more children to supplement parental incomes decline. When people are accustomed to high standard of living, it becomes a costly affair to rear a large family. So, yun. Nakalimutan niya din i-foresee na kasabay ng advancement ay yung pagtaas ng demand ng mga tao to have a comfortable life. To have a comfortable life na kaya nilang matugunan. For example na lang, diba? Like, yung mga mayayamang tao. They only have like 2 or 3 children. Minsan nga, 1 lang, diba? Or for example, they have bills to pay, like a huge house or transport like car, motorcycles, and whatever it is. Yung parang mas na-focus na lang sila to live their life in a comfortable, to have a life that is comfortable rather than having a large family. Lalong-lalo na kung malaki yung income per capita, di ba? So, parang dun pa lang, nakalimutan ni Malthus na merong changes when it comes to, factors that will lead humans to choose more on having a comfortable life rather than having a large family. Kasi napakahirap naman talaga na malaki yung pamilya mo tapos hindi mo naman napoprovide yung pangangailangan. And people don't want that. People want to live a comfortable life. Another example dito is yun sa China, yung one-child policy. So yun, parang nagpo-focus na ngayon more, lalo-lalo na dito sa Pilipinas, na parang mas focus na ngayon to have a comfortable life, to have a life na yung kaya lang, hindi yung sobra-sobra tapos hindi naman talaga kayang buhayin, di ba? Parang, kumbaga, nagpapaliit lang tayo ng espasyo dito sa mundo. So number 8, preventive checks do not pertain to moral restraint. So Malthus was essentially a religious man who laid emphasis on moral restraint, celibacy, late marriage, and etc. to control population. But he could not visualize that human beings would invent contraceptives and other family planning devices for birth control. This was perhaps due to the fact that he could not make any distinction between sexual desire and the desire to have children. People have sexual desire but they do not have to have more children. Specifically, those people na parang hindi pa ready. So, yung magagamit sila ng contraceptives. Thus, more moral restraint alone cannot help to control the increase in population which Malthus suggested. Family planning is essential as a preventive check. So, nakalimutan ni Malthus na i-consider na there, aside from advancement itself, is yung parang na-focus lang kasi siya in religious concept lang. Kasi, di ba, yun nga, RH bill pa lang dito sa Pilipinas, di ba, parang ang dami ng criticisms doon, lalo-lalo na sa simbahan, di ba? Having to use a contraceptive pills rather than, restraining. Marriage na lang, hayaan na lang yung mga bata, mas marami ng ganun. Ang daming problema when it comes to, siguro kasi hindi nakita ng ibang tao na, people who wants to have sex, just, have sex for fun, for, daily, hindi naman siguro daily, yung parang pinapalabas lang nila yung mga kalandian nila sa katawan, yung mga desire nila to, sexual desire nila, pinapalabas lang nila yan, having sex with other people, or, so, hindi nakita ni Malthus yun kasi na-focus lang siya kung ano yung tingin ng simbahan, kung ano yung religious na moral when it comes to sex and marriage, di ba? Kasi, dati pa naman, kahit na dito sa Pilipinas, di ba? Like, our culture is to, have marriage first, to be married first before having children or to engage yourself in sexual activity. So, hindi niya nakita yon na pwedeng mag-invent ang mga tao ng contraceptives. And yun nga, yung akala niya lang na pag hindi napigilan ng mga tao na gusto nilang mag-sex is diretso na agad na magkakaroon ng anak. Diba nga sa ibang mga mag-asawa ngayon, parang pinagpaplanuhan pa nila kung mag-aanak ba sila at a specific moment or hindi pa. So, ganun lang naman yung mga sides ng mga advancement ngayon, lalong-lalo sa mga tao. Excuse me na lang for my bulol way of speaking. So, yun nga. Yun yung hindi nakita ni Malthus, yung preventive checks for having sex. So number 9, positive checks not due to overpopulation. So Malthus' mysticism and religious education led him to believe that overpopulation was a heavy burden on earth, which was automatically lessened by God in the form of misery, wars, famine, floods, diseases, and pestilence. But all of these are natural calamities which are not peculiar to overpopulated countries. They visit even those countries where the population is declined or stationary, such as France and Japan. So, yung napaka-narrow lang ng pag-iisip ni Malthus when it comes to having or creating this theory. Kasi, parang, ang dating kasi nun, kapag overpopulated yung country, paparusahan sila ng Panginoon, like going through wars, experiencing famine, floods, other natural calamities. Pero yung totoo naman talaga, mga tao lang din naman at yung nature lang naman ang may may say doon. For example, war and misery. Minsan ang mga tao lang din naman yung may kasalanan doon, 'di ba? Like yun nga, World War, 'di ba? Mga tao lang din naman yung nagka-create noon. Though yung mga innocent people lang naman, hindi naman lang. So innocent people suffer, but still it's humans activities to create war. And yung mga floods, diseases, pestilence, and other natural calamities is by nature. Sometimes nga, dahil din sa human activities, di ba, na we experience landslide, for example, flood. So, minsan, kagagawan lang din naman ng tao. Pero hindi ibig sabihin nun na pinaparusahan tayo ni Lord. So, yung ganito kasi ng mga instances, ang tingin ni Malthus, dun lang sa overpopulated na country, hindi niya nakita na yung mga ganitong bagay is mangyayari din kahit nga dun sa mga countries na sakto lang yung population or kontrolado lang yung population like Japan or France or China or US. So nangyayari nga yung mga ganun kahit sa sakto lang na populated country. Ano pa kaya dun sa overpopulated, diba? So, sobrang negative ng approach of the Malthusian theory. So, hindi talaga siya for generalization theory, something na pwedeng ma-apply sa lahat ng country. So, hindi siya for economic for all. Siguro for specific country lang or specific community. So, now let's go for the last criticism and applicability. Malthus is a false prophet. The Malthusian theory is not applicable to countries for which this was propounded. In the Western European countries, the bogey and pessimism of Malthus has been overcome. His prophecy that misery will stalk these countries if they fail to check the growth of population through preventive checks has been proved wrong. By a decline in birth rate, adequacy of food supply, and increase in agricultural and industrial production. Thus, Malthus has proved to be a false prophet. So yun nga, when it comes to theorizing things kasi, parang nag-visualize ka na kung anong mangyayari sa susunod na mga taon or sa anong mangyayari sa future. So, yung calculations ni Malthus, yung failures niya to oversee the advancement in different aspect, doon pa lang nasasabi na mali yung theory mo. Like, false yung pag-visualize mo sa future or false yung pag-visualize mo sa or pag-predict mo sa mangyayari. So, doon pa lang parang, yun nga, maraming loopholes yung theory mo and natatawag ka tuloy na false prophet. So, yun nga, kalimutan nyo yung advancement of agriculture and industrial production, yung increase of food supply, and yung pag-decline ng birth rate. Kasi nga, di ba, maraming factors na hindi niya na-consider when it comes to creating a theory, which is the Malthusian theory. So, sabi dun sa nabasa namin na economic book, anonymous lang yung nagsabi nito. Ang sabi niya is, pagdating ng araw, mas marami ang bibig na papakainin kaysa sa pagkain ay papakain. So, which is sometimes happen to a specific community, pero hindi naman talaga generalized, di ba? So, these are the references for our topic today. So, any questions? None? So, thank you for listening.